150,000 cases of fraud to go uninvestigated. Will he fire them, or will he just continue with the same liberal incompetence? 100,000 lost jobs in the last 2 months alone. Why is it that after this Prime Minister promised that he'd be the first, he's the worst in the G7?
In one brutal 90-minute question period, the Canadian government was attacked simultaneously on jobs, inflation, housing, energy policy, religious freedom, and a $5 billion scandal. By the end, Prime Minister Carney had no good answers to any of them. This is what a government losing control looks like in real time. This is Canadian Parliament on March the 25th, 2026. The Carney government promised Canadians the strongest economy in the G7. 1 year later, they're delivering the worst. The facts are brutal. 100,000 jobs lost in the first 2 months of 2026. Only shrinking economy in the G7. Second highest unemployment in the G7. Worst food inflation in the G7. Highest household debt in the G7. Gas prices 26 cents higher than the US. But that's not all. Today the government is also under fire for a $5 billion benefits modernization scandal. Controversial bill. C9 on hate crimes. Energy policy failures. Housing shortage. Immigration fraud cover-up. This is the moment when everything hits at once. The Conservative opposition opens with the most devastating attack. Economic failure on a historic scale. The Prime Minister promised the strongest economy in the G7. Instead, Canada is at the bottom. We have the only shrinking economy, the second highest unemployment, the highest household debt, the worst food inflation. Then comes the killer moment. Every other G7 country faces the exact same global pressures. Yet their economies are growing and ours are shrinking. This is a domestic failure made in Canada by this Liberal government. The point is simple but devastating. Global factors can't explain why Canada is uniquely failing while other G7 nations succeed. The blame lies with Liberal policy. The Prime Minister's response is weak. He talks about infrastructure investments and defense projects. But families watching at home aren't interested in long-term strategy. They want to know why they're losing jobs today. Multiple Conservative MPs hammer the government on job losses, each one repeating the same statistic. 100,000 jobs lost in just 2 months. One Conservative MP makes it personal. In just the first 2 months of the year, 100,000 Canadians lost their jobs. 100,000. We are the only shrinking economy in the G7. We have the second highest unemployment rate in the G7. Another drives it home. Over 100,000 full-time jobs lost in a month alone, and close to 50,000 youth jobs lost. The government's response is defensive and disconnected. They talk about creating 80,000 jobs since September. They talk about defense projects and infrastructure. They talk about investments coming. But none of this addresses the immediate crisis. Canadians are losing jobs right now. The government is offering promises about later. Conservative MPs shift to food inflation, the issue hitting family dinner tables. Canada now leads the G7 in food price inflation. Every G7 country faces similar external factors, but only Canada has both the worst food inflation and the only shrinking economy. Why? The government tries to deflect. The industrial carbon tax has a negligible effect on food. But one Conservative MP destroys this argument. You're adding a fuel standard tax and you're maintaining the industrial carbon tax. These policies are directly driving up costs at the pump and in production. When will you stop? The government's response is defensive. We cut the consumer carbon tax. We're investing in affordability programs. But the opposition has already won this argument. The optics are terrible. While families struggle with food costs, the government is maintaining and adding taxes on production and fuel. Conservative MPs attacked the government's refusal to unleash Canada's energy sector. For years, the Liberal government did everything in their power to block pipelines, stall major energy projects, and scare off investment, weakening one of Canada's most critical economic drivers, the oil sands. And Canadians are now paying the price. They point out gas prices are 26 cents higher in Canada than the US, and Liberal fuel and carbon taxes are making it even worse. The government responds with production statistics. Oil and gas production in Canada is at record highs, up 34% in the last 10 years. But this misses the point. The opposition isn't arguing against oil and gas production. They're arguing that government policy is making energy more expensive for Canadians. The government has no good answer to this. The facts are, gas is more expensive in Canada than the US. The government maintains taxes on fuel and production. The government won't remove these taxes despite the crisis. It's an indefensible position. In the middle of all these crises, a Conservative MP raises the Kuram benefits modernization disaster. The Liberals' Kuram financial fiasco continues after $5 billion in cost overruns. Officials have admitted they do not know how much it will cost in the future. It could easily exceed $660 million to $1 billion in annual operating expenses. Kuram is already the most expensive liberal scandal in history. This is significant because it reveals government incompetence on multiple levels. A 50-year-old system needed modernization, legitimate. But the implementation has ballooned to $5 billion over budget. Nobody knows the final cost. The government is outsourcing to international consultants and spending millions of taxpayer dollars on a failed project. The government's defense? We're addressing the backlog. 7.7 million seniors are receiving their payments. But this doesn't address the fundamental failure. A modernization project spiraled completely out of control financially. That's not a feature, that's a disaster. While the government is reeling from economic attacks, a new front opens: religious freedom and Bill C-9, hate crimes legislation. A conservative MP argues, no community in this country will be protected from hate with legislation that threatens to imprison them for deeply and sincerely held religious beliefs. But that's precisely what Bill C-9 is going to do. This attack is significant because it fractures the government's coalition. Some liberals support the bill, some don't. Some allies oppose it. The Justice Minister responds by defending the bill as protecting religious communities. But the conservative argument is that it could imprison people for religious speech. This is a civil liberties argument, and it's dividing Canadians. The government is on uncertain ground here because they're trying to balance protecting religious communities from hate crimes while not restricting religious speech. These two goals are in tension, and the government hasn't found a position that satisfies everyone. What emerges from this question period is a pattern of a government losing control of multiple narratives simultaneously. On the economy, government says infrastructure investments are coming. Opposition says jobs are disappearing now. On inflation, government says tax cuts help. Opposition says they're maintaining taxes that drive up costs. On energy, government says production is high. Opposition says prices are higher for Canadians. On the benefits scandal, government says they're fixing it. Opposition says it's the most expensive liberal scandal ever. On religious freedom, government says the bill protects communities. Opposition says it violates civil liberties. In every case, the government is playing defense. In every case, the opposition has a simple, powerful argument that resonates with voters. The government's responses are complex, detailed, and focus on long-term plans. But voters care about immediate problems: losing jobs, paying more at the pump, struggling with inflation. Early in the session, an opposition leader opens with an explosive attack on the previous government's immigration failures. The Auditor General denounced the current Justice Minister, Heritage Minister, and Immigration Minister. These three ministers caused a catastrophe in the international student file. They allowed 150,000 suspected cases of fraud and didn't even investigate them. The Prime Minister tries to respond with statistics. International student numbers have gone down 70%, asylum claims are down by a third. But the opposition immediately counters. Compared to Harper government immigration policy, asylum claims are up 2,880%. Temporary foreign workers up 178%. International students up 39% overall. This is significant because it shows the government is cherry-picking statistics. Yes, they reduced numbers from the previous government's peak, but compared to a previous, conservative, baseline, immigration is still massively higher. The government can't win this argument because the facts don't support their position. They inherited a broken system with massive fraud that they didn't fix quickly enough. A government-friendly MP asks about housing announcements. The housing minister responds with an announcement: 1,200 affordable housing units in New Brunswick. But this is exposed as inadequate by opposition MPs. Canada needs 500,000 homes built every year for the next several years. Your proposal of 8,000 homes, based on temporary tax measures, is a marginal measure. The government talks about temporary measures. The opposition points out that temporary measures don't build confidence in the market. This pattern repeats throughout question period. The government offers temporary, limited solutions. The opposition demands systemic change. What's devastating about this question period is that the government can't defend any of its core policy positions with confidence. On jobs, they offer future projects. Opposition points to present job losses. On inflation, they offer tax cuts. Opposition points to increased production costs. On energy, they offer production statistics. Opposition points to consumer prices. On housing, they offer temporary measures. Opposition demands systemic solutions. On fraud, they offer reduced numbers. Opposition points to absolute levels and increases from historical baseline. On benefits scandal, they offer backlog reduction. Opposition points to $5 billion cost overruns. In every case, the government is defending rather than attacking. In every case, the opposition has a simpler, more powerful argument. This is the sign of a government that's lost the narrative battle. By the end of this question period, the cumulative damage to the government's credibility is devastating. Canadians watching see a government that promised the strongest economy, delivered the worst, lost 100,000 jobs, can't explain why Canada is uniquely failing, is maintaining taxes that drive up costs, oversees a $5 billion scandal, is divided on religious freedom issues, can't address immigration fraud adequately, offers temporary solutions to permanent crises. The opposition, by contrast, presents a unified message. Liberal policies have failed Canadians. The solutions are simple: cut taxes, unleash energy production, stop the scandal spending. Whether those conservative solutions are actually better is debatable, but they're clear, they're simple, and they contrast sharply with the government's complex, defensive, long-term focused arguments. This question period matters because it reveals a government in deep political trouble. When you're attacked on 5 different fronts, jobs, inflation, energy, scandals, and civil liberties, and you have no coherent response to any of them, you're in crisis mode. The Prime Minister entered office promising to be the strongest economy in the G7. He's delivered the worst. That's not a policy disagreement. That's a broken promise of historic proportions. The opposition is exploiting this mercilessly, and they have the facts on their side. The government's complex explanations about long-term infrastructure projects and defense spending don't land when families can't afford groceries or are losing their jobs. This is the moment when a government that seemed stable begins to crack under pressure. So here's the real question facing Mark Carney's government after this question period. When you're simultaneously losing the economic argument, the inflation argument, the energy argument, the scandal argument, and the civil liberties argument, how much longer can you survive politically? The answer will be revealed in the next election. But if today is any indication, the government's time is running out.